Yes, very pleased to present some of the main ideas in UNESCO's report, the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, report entitled Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. And I'd like to just start by saying something about the nature of the report. I think important to make that clear from the outset that the report is not intended as a blueprint for what needs to be done in education as we look to the future, but rather as a provocation, an inspiration, a provocation for public debate and dialogue, an inspiration to innovate, an invitation to question our understandings of education, of its purpose, of how education works. So I say that because the report was released in November of last year, 2021, but it was 2 years in the making. And during that time, there was an international commission that was working, deliberating on a set of issues around challenges for the future and the implications for knowledge, learning, and education as we look to the future. But while the commission worked, from the outset, we had a broad process of public consultation with a range of constituencies. At the time, very open consultation about how youth, students, parents, teachers, civil society organizations, members of and public officials, how they saw the future, what fears and what hopes for the future, and how they thought this would translate into education and what needs to be changed in education. So it really is an invitation. Just wanted to start a provocation, an invitation to debate, and an inspiration for innovation. So not a closed document, and we'll come back to this at the very end, and to the idea of reimagining our futures together as a process. Second, important to say that this type of exercise of looking at the bigger picture is something that UNESCO has been doing over the decades, taking key moments of historical change, rapid transformation, societal transformation, and posing the larger questions of the purpose of education, the nature of learning, for what type of society, for what type of future. And the first time UNESCO did this was now 50 years ago, in the late 60s. And this gave rise to the report in 1972, Learning to Be. And late 60s, early 70s, a time of turmoil, social, civic, political unrest, national independence movements, women's rights movement, civil rights movements, a time of questioning modes of organization of power and values transmitted in society. It was also a time of hope, strong belief actually in hopeful about the future, and a strong belief in science and scientific progress. It was also a time, just to recall, of the Cold War, with two diametrically opposed models of development, but both really grounded in this optimistic view of the future and the promises of science and scientific progress. The second moment was early 1990s, so just after the end of the Cold War, a time of intensification of globalization, a time of, it was just the very beginnings of the internet. And the similar exercise was undertaken by UNESCO with the commission headed by Jacques Delors at the time, and which gave rise to the publication in 1996, the report of the commission, the Delors Commission, Learning the Treasure Within. What was perhaps the most influential notion, idea, was that of the four pillars of education: learning to be, learning to do, learning to know, and learning to live together. And the one that probably attracted the most interest politically and among educators was learning to live together. It was this focus on the role of education in strengthening social cohesion, in more inclusive citizenship, in opening to diversity of cultures and intercultural understanding. This was 1996. And now this report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, released, as I said, last year. We could say that this moment is a moment that is marked perhaps first by the recognition of the complex and interdependent dimensions of development. We do have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is a recognition that our challenges are shared, north and south, are interconnected, are complex. In terms, and it's true that when the work of the International Commission on the Futures of Education was initiated in 2019, just before the outbreak of COVID, many did ask the question, why do we need to rethink education now? Haven't we set global goals and targets with the 2030 Agenda, in particular, Sustainable Development Goal 4 around education? We have set goals and targets for 2030, so why rethink education now? And the starting point really of the Reimagining Our Futures Together is a recognition of the dual challenge that education is confronted with today. On one hand, we have continued exclusion, continued unfulfilled promises of the right to basic education for all, just looking at shares of children, youth who are out of school, looking at the shares of adults who are non-literate still today and despite progress. And this tends to be the most economically marginalized and vulnerable populations that are excluded, or those that are historically excluded for cultural, political reasons. So we have on one hand this legacy of exclusions, and that doing more of the same in education will not solve these problems. We cannot simply invest more and do more. There are questions, fundamental questions to be asked about our models, about our approaches in education. That's one piece of the dual challenge. The second piece is that the social outcomes, the development outcomes of education are perhaps also part of the problem that we find ourselves today in. Looking at the environment, for example, the fact that it is the more developed, more educated societies, more educated individuals that are the ones who are contributing most to climate change. So there is also something to be examined and critically examined in terms of the content and process of learning, and its contribution to the reproduction of inequalities, of exclusions, transmission of bias and discrimination across generations, contribution to degradation of our environment and to climate change in particular. So the second piece of the challenge is, how do we unlock the transformational potential of education? And for both these reasons, we need to transform education. That is the starting point in the framing of the Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract, report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education. Excuse me. The proposal made in the report is, as the subtitle clearly states, a new social contract for education, the need to forge a new social contract for education. And what the report does is provides, this no social contract is understood both as a vision and a process. The vision based on the reaffirmation of education as a public endeavor, a common good, a reaffirmation of the right to education as a fundamental right, and thirdly, a vision founded on or grounded in the recognition of the diversity of ways of knowing, experiencing the world, conceptions of human well-being, the diversity of knowledge systems that need to be recognized, and all leveraged in response to the increasingly complex development challenges ahead. So that's for the vision. A number of proposals are made in terms of the what, the how of learning around curriculum. That curriculum and curriculum design should increasingly move towards greater interdisciplinarity, intercultural understanding, more focus on ecological issues. In terms of pedagogies, that pedagogies traditionally, educational trajectories are seen as individual trajectories of competition, selection, ranking, and that pedagogy is, the proposal here is that pedagogy should be encouraging and promoting cooperation and solidarity. This has many implications for the way we teach and learn, the way we organize learning groups. In terms of teaching, that the teaching profession should be seen as a collaborative profession, fully supported with opportunities for professional development and socially valued. There is no transformation of education without addressing the key issue of the teaching profession, the working conditions, and the social status of teachers. One of the final and maybe important proposals is around schools, that schools need to be protected as unique social sites. We've seen this during the period of disruption caused by COVID, that no matter what deployment of distance learning, no matter what access to that, to these distance learning opportunities, nothing replaces the social and physical space of schools in particular as the foundations for broader educational ecosystems. So schools to be protected, but they must be transformed. They must be transformed by connecting them to the really network of learning spaces around be they social, cultural, professional spaces of learning, be they physical or virtual. And perhaps a word on digital and digital learning. The one of the main ideas in the report proposed around the virtual world is that decisions, the use, the understanding and the use, decisions around the use of technology and digital technology in education must be made. These decisions must be part of the physical, the public sphere. Key decisions about digital technologies as they relate to education have to be made in the public space and guided by principles of education as a public endeavor, as a common good, as a collective responsibility. And building on that, I could mention the Declaration on Connectivity for Education that was adopted in December 2021, and the key principles that should help steer the digital transformation of education. That it is much of the dominant discourse is around accelerating the digital transformation of education. What is key, and I think inspired by the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, is that this transformation needs to be steered. And the declaration, the Rewired Declaration on Connectivity in Education, adopted in December 2021, proposes three principles that can guide this transformation. First, that we must center the most marginalized. We've seen with the COVID experience, regardless of efforts made to deploy distance learning and digital learning in particular, that this not only exposed inequalities, but supercharged them. In fact, a survey internationally of the evidence shows that most children and youth did not have access to any kind of digital learning during the period of school closures. We also learned during COVID that even those that did have access to remote digital learning, that the learning process itself was impoverished, if we want. There was less engagement, less achievement academically, and that generally it narrowed the educational experience, because education is not just about the pursuit of academic course of study, but it is also about the social, civic, even political learning that happens in interaction with others and in interaction of the school with its environment. So the first principle of the declaration is center the most marginalized. Most of the innovation in edtech traditionally benefits more privileged teachers and students, and in the hopes that this will trickle down and become more accessible to all. The principle here is to say, let's reverse things. Let us focus on the most excluded, the most vulnerable. If the solutions work for them, then it will be much easier to scale this out and fairer to scale this out to others. The second principle is that we need to expand our investment in free public digital content. And this, again, we saw during COVID that countries that were less well prepared, teachers, students, parents had to scramble to find materials that were not always free, often produced by commercial providers, not necessarily aligned with national curricula and not always up to standard in terms of protection, safety, and protection of privacy. So the second principle is really about the need to strengthen public digital learning platforms and content. And UNESCO and UNICEF are soon launching an initiative focused in particular on this principle, an initiative entitled Gateways to Public Digital Learning, with a focus on the strengthening and improvement of public digital learning platforms and content. And third, the third principle to say that we can have connectivity, we can have content to be connected to, but there's still the pedagogical aspect. And it's not only about having the digital learning skills, but making the most use pedagogically of digital resources. This requires new paradigms. We're often in the paradigm of one device, one connected device per learner. There is much that can be done with a group of learners around one connected device, and connecting that group to other groups. There is interesting innovations that could be brought in to enrich social and civic learning. But there are also important issues around protection of data privacy, both for teachers and learners, and ensuring safety. So there is, beyond the technical skills, we often hear about digital skills and the need to strengthen digital skills of learners and teachers. It's really about digital literacy, competencies, critically understanding and being able to use digital learning opportunities in a safe and meaningful way. Coming back into end, the reimagining our futures together, a new social contract for education, as I said, is not a blueprint. It is not a guide on how to or what to do, but an invitation to forge together, to critically examine our models, our approaches, our ways of doing, and this at all levels, whether it's at the policy level, at the level of institutions, at the level of teachers, of learners, of parents, and communities. And it's an invitation to engage with these questions as part now of the dynamic around transforming education. The report has become a key reference for the UN Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit. The summit in September 2022 is not an endpoint, but really, in a way, a starting point to encourage this dynamic of critical re-examination and redefining the contours of what a new educational culture would look like in particular contexts. And this report, we hope, the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, will continue to serve that purpose going forward. Thank you very much.